accomplishments of the Messianics and Neo-Messianics throughout 2,000 years. The Hebrew Gospels that were not supposed to exist were preserved and copied and recopied by the Messianic Church, which was also not supposed to exist after the 4th century when they were declared heretic. There's actually 17, but I'll add in the 17 as we go. Number 1, the life and death of Yeshua HaMashiach changed the world. Right, this is the leader of the Messianic Church. Messianic means followers of the Messiah. So Yeshua was the original Messianic. And this was his followers, and this is what the church is based upon. What the modern church is struggling with is they want to ignore the part of all the early Christians being Jewish Christians. Because they created a Greek church and then told the Jewish Christian church to go away. And this is one of the things that they were trying to suppress, basically. It's the Yeshua dynasty. You know, Joseph and Mary, Joseph and Miriam gave birth to Yeshua the Messiah, but also to James the Just, who was Yeshua's older brother, I believe, and he's the one who took over the church after Yeshua's crucifixion. And his younger brother, Jude, who also took over the church when he was very old, 95. You probably know about Zechariah and Elisheva. That would be Elizabeth, Elisheva was the cousin of Miriam, so Zechariah would be his cousin-in-law, more like an uncle because of his age and his position in the family. And they had a son by divine influence, John the Baptist, who had no issue. And then there's Cleophas, who was Joseph's brother. So all of his family would be relatives of Yeshua. So all these people played major roles in the church. There was a Yeshua dynasty. Why don't you know about this? This is all scriptural, by the way. Every one of these things I'm telling you, they're in Scripture. There's plenty of argument because they don't like this. When they created a Greek church in the 4th century, or a Greco-Roman church at the time, they tossed the Yeshua dynasty. They don't want a Yeshua dynasty. They want a Greek dynasty, right? It's really that simple. They're creating a Greek church. They wanted a Greek God, a Greek Jesus, Greek scripture, and Greek doctrine. Doctrine that established their power. And what they did not want was a Yeshua dynasty. They wanted a Greek dynasty. So we've got Cleophas, who's Joseph's brother, and 2 of his children were James the Lesser and Jude Thaddeus, who were apostles. They also had another son named Simeon. He took over as the head of the church from James. In fact, the flight to Pella when the Romans surrounded Jerusalem, he was the one who led them out. James was around for 30 years, Simeon for I don't know how long, but they were both crucial. Without those men, the church, as we know it, would not have survived. All right, then after Simeon, I think there may have been one other or 2 possibly in there, but Jude took over. He was about 95 at this point, but he was the brother of the Messiah, so he became leader of the church, and it was his grandsons, James and Zochar, who were leaders of the church, and the last known member of the Yeshua dynasty was Judah Kyriakos, the last known Jewish Christian bishop of Jerusalem until modern times. Now Cleophas also had a daughter named Salome, and she married a man named Zebedee, and they had sons. They were called the sons of Zebedee in the Bible, and that would be James the Greater and John the Apostle. So of the 12 apostles, 4 were relatives of Yeshua. Never heard this before, right? They don't want you to know this, but everything I've said is in Scripture. And there's a lot of argument, of course, about it because they don't really want this to be true. So they just basically toss it. So you'll hear a lot of argument, but every one of those things is mentioned in the Bible, in the good book. So this new Greco-Roman Church of Constantine was created in the 4th century, and in 325, the Council of Nicaea declared the Messianic Church of Yeshua HaMashiach, or Jesus Christ, whichever you wish to call him. They declared his original church to be heretic. This is not something they like to scream from the altar, but this is historical fact and it's inescapable. So that church was founded on a great apostasy. They wiped out their competition. I mean, that's their competition. It's all about competition. There have been some wonderful leaders in all of the churches, really saintly people. And then there have been others that were more interested in power than salvation. Does that surprise anyone?
No.
Not really, does it? Okay, so persecution of Messianics continued for almost 2 millennia. They were hunted to extinction and their scriptures were burned. And in the 4th century, they were declared heretic. According to church history, they disappeared by the next century. They just went away like good little boys and girls. Except that Yeshua's followers don't go away like good little boys and girls. They continued. And they were called by many names. One was Nazarenes, Jewish Christians, conversos, which means converts, new Christians. They categorized all of them as crypto-Jews. They had converted, but they were just faking it, and there certainly were some of those. But it's very demeaning to call every convert to Christianity a crypto-Jew. It's incredibly insulting, because we know from the Inquisition records many of these people died under torture without saying a word, because they wanted them to rat on their families and their friends. And they refused to do that. They refused to renounce their faith. So they were incredibly, incredibly brave and believed in the Messiah. They were not allowed in the New World unless they could prove their Catholic heritage, except for Portugal. They had such a small population, and the New World, they owned half the New World. So they had this great area to fill and not the population to do so. So they were practically begging the Messianics. They were called marranos in Spain, which means pigs, which was intended to insult them, of course, and demean them. So that every Messianic from Spain or any part of Europe that would get to the New World, they would call themselves Portuguese, of course. It became synonymous with Messianic, because the Portuguese did not require you to prove your Catholic background. So they all called themselves Portuguese, so that's a synonym for them. But more often, they were called heretics, because the Spanish started the Inquisition to try conversos. They didn't try to present any evidence or anything. They achieved all their convictions through confessions obtained by torture. So the church history tells the Messianic church disappeared in the 5th century. They didn't disappear. They made major contributions to world history throughout all 20 centuries. We're on number 2. The Messianic Apostolic Church spread the gospel to the entire world. Before the Roman Church was even on its feet. And they did so with 2 books, the Tanakh, the Old Testament in Hebrew, and the Hebrew Gospels. Now some of it, basically what we know about the Hebrew Gospels is that Matthew definitely, all the church fathers said so, and Luke, although Luke was later expanded, so it's kind of half and half. Mark and John, as far as we know, were originally written in Greek. Acts, since Luke was written in Hebrew, Acts probably was. We have the manuscripts to prove it now. We haven't yet gotten to the point of doing the linguistic analysis. We have the 80-plus manuscripts. Since our work at the Institute brought out the fact that the Hebrew Gospels did indeed survive, churches and libraries all over the place have been like pulling them out. The Vatican actually led the way on this. So if the Vatican's not going to try and hide this anymore, we're not going to keep these books down in our sub-basement. We can sell them. They're worth something. They may not just be translations. They may be really worth something. So now we're able to get them. We've obtained a lot that had never been digitized before, never been put in the catalog. So we've done a really, really great work. And there's more. Like I said, we're tracking more than 80 manuscripts now. Almost all of them in Hebrew, all of them manuscripts except maybe one in a handwritten meaning. We've got 4 in Yiddish, 1 in Syriac, but mostly all in Hebrew. And we also have other manuscripts of the early European languages, written in Romance, Catalan. Occitan also haven't found a manuscript of that. We've obtained maybe 75% of these manuscripts, and we're in the process of studying them. So it's expensive, but it's really worth it. We have the largest collection of Hebrew manuscripts of the Gospels in the world. Digitized versions, but. So these people spread it all over the world to India, China, every country imaginable. And they did it with the Hebrew Gospels. Nestorian was the church of the East. They split with the Roman church in the 4th century before they started making all these changes. And they spread, they took a lot of books with them in Greek, in Hebrew, in Aramaic, classics, and they went to the East, and they established bishoprics all the way to China. The Nestorian church, which was essentially a Messianic church, because it was an early church, before the Greco-Romans changed the whole doctrine. They were the largest church, the largest Christian church in the world, and in the medieval period. By numbers, by extent, any criteria you wanted to use. You probably haven't ever heard of them either, right? No. Marco Polo said the way to China was dotted with Nestorian chapels. The Silk Road, there are Nestorian chapels all along it. So they did an incredible amount of proselytization and spreading of the word, and also preserving the incredibly important Greek manuscripts and Hebrew manuscripts. Later on, when the Arabs took over Spain, these documents that had been taken to the East by the Nestorians, translated into Arabic, started to come back into Europe. Europe was deep in the Dark Ages. A lot of that had to do with their banishing, their decision that no one should be able to read the Bible, so they're not pushing literacy. They wanted all the interpretation to come through them and their priests. Their priests were illiterate, and they were really pushing darkness. You know, they had banned Greek, they had banned Hebrew. Those manuscripts are no longer being copied and recopied and preserved, so some of the most priceless manuscripts in Hebrew and in Greek were lost. The reason we have them today, you've heard of the model of Western science and civilization came from Greece. Yes? We've all heard this? Okay, well it did. All right? But it came back into Greece from the East through the Arabic translations, which were translated back into the European languages, generally in Toledo, by Messianics. Okay, they were the ones who knew languages. They had grown up in the Jewish educational system in the yeshivas, and they knew languages. And because they were converts, they were more trusted by the Christians, many of whom were paying them. Okay, there were Jews too in the mix. Wherever there were Messianics, there were Jews. Wherever there were Jews, there were Messianics. It's hard to tweak the two apart, you know, but you just have to accept that they often worked together, sometimes fought and pulled each other apart. You know. But in any case, the Messianic scribes translated many of these books back into the European languages. sparking a little thing called the Renaissance. So Paul had a great desire to go into Sepharad. Sepharad is what we now know as Spain. Sepharad means the land of the book. So the Sephardim are the people of the book. So there were 500,000 Jews in Sepharad in Spain during the Middle Ages. And of these 500,000 Jews, more than half of them converted to Christianity. Yes, some were forced, but most did it out of their own free will. So it was an incredible, incredible thing, and they wanted their scripture in the Lashon HaKodesh. Some of them just wanted to do assembly. Others said, we're going to do this. This is a Jewish thing. This is a God of the Hebrews. This is his son who is a Hebrew. The scriptures were written in Hebrew. The Old Testament was written in Hebrew. The New Testament is available in Hebrew. Much of it was written in Hebrew. So we're going to do this. So many people had converted that synagogues were abandoned. So many rabbis had converted. And the old Christians, they didn't really want these Jewish Christians in their church rubbing shoulders with them and all. So they gave them the synagogues to use as their church. And the rabbis that had converted became their priests. All right? And the book that they used was the Hebrew Gospels, which were still extant at the time. And indeed, we have them. The page views I've showed you are from the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, right? So they had their own yeshivas, they had their own bishops. This is not Roman Catholicism, is it?
No.
No. So the Roman Church felt like, well, we have to take this out, right? That was everyone has heard of the Spanish Inquisition, but very few people know that the whole point of the Spanish Inquisition was to crush this resurgent Messianic church. That was the whole point of it.
Yeah, I never heard that.
To blow, no, you wouldn't, would you?
No.
Well, here's the thing, right? There's the truth, and then there's the spin. Spin wasn't invented in the 21st century. It's been around, okay? So their whole narrative was that, well, they were all faking it. 250,000 people were all faking it. Does that sound like, how demeaning is that to the saving power of the Messiah, to accepting Christ in your heart? 250,000 people were faking it. Right? Not a single one of them was sincere. They're all crypto Jews. We can just toss them off. That's all heretics, is all. Yeah, well, that was the narrative. That seemed to work, so that's what, and historians are pretty much going along with that. But there's enough evidence out there. And one of them is the Hebrew Gospels. That's a lot of work for faking it, right? So there were very, very devout Messianics. It's very sincere Messianics. And yes, they were crypto Jews. Didn't usually last past the first generation. But most of them were very sincere Messianics. They believed they would not give up their Messiah. They would not give up their Tanakh, their Hebrew Gospel. They spread the underground church throughout Europe. There are three things that we find common to all the Messianic communities everywhere, even after they became mostly Gentile. Their blood blended with those of the Gentiles, and these we call neo-Messianic churches that become mostly Messianic by the time of the Middle Ages. Not in Spain, however. They were Jewish Christian to the core. They were very big on evangelism. There was a school of martyrs that was set up in Lombardy, and these people went there knowing that they would be martyred for their faith, but they went out and evangelized everywhere anyway, and they were martyred for their faith. They're just faking it, though. I'm sorry, I've been told I should not be sarcastic with a straight face. They were accused.
It makes for good presentation, though.
It does. Except people say, you said they were just faking it.
Hey, I get a kick, you know all this stuff.
Yeah, I do know this stuff. But they really did an enormous amount of evangelization at the threat to their lives. So they're huge on, all Messianic churches, neo-Messianic churches were huge on evangelization. Yes, they went underground, but they sent people out all over the world and spread the faith. The second thing is education was an enormous thing for them at a time when everything was illiterate. Everyone was illiterate. The Barbas of the Waldensians, for example, they're traveling pastors, they spoke several languages. They could read in several languages. This was the Messianic church, way up here as far as their educational emphasis. So they were very, very knowledgeable. Rome tried to send people up against them to debate them, and they typically wiped them out. It was a total disaster. Their pastors are so much better educated than the Roman Catholic priests that were sent against them. Number 3, Messianics carefully preserved the Hebrew Gospels and the received texts. So we have various attestations of that they were very good scribes, and they took very good care to preserve these documents. This is from the Preface to Luke by St. Jerome. The Gospels are already written for those in Judea, and Matthew in Lombardy. It already reached Lombardy. That's where the center of the Neo-Messianic church in northern Italy was. Matthew, written in Hebrew, in the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia, the HGC. The first evangelist wrote this in the Holy Tongue from memory. That's the Lashon HaKodesh, which always refers to Hebrew, to his brothers. And these pages are from the Hebrew Gospels from Catalonia. The Lucian Greek Bible, the Textus Receptus, was translated in 290 AD from the Hebrew Tanakh, which is the Old Testament, and the Hebrew Gospels. Lucian was a Messianic. How do I know that? He knew Hebrew. You know how few people there have been through the centuries that knew Hebrew that weren't Hebrew. Very few. You can almost count them on your fingers. Okay, so he translated the Hebrew Gospels and the Greek, and the Greek manuscripts are out there. Whatever they had, the Latin and the Greek, and they were translated into Greek. This was the first, the Itala Bible in the 2nd century, 150, was the first compilation of the Bible. It was in Latin. Right? That became the Bible of the Waldensians, who, they spoke dialects of Italian, like Jean-Claude here. So that was the first compilation. The second compilation was a Greek compilation by Lucian of Antioch, who was a Messianic. So there were 2 strands. So this was all done before the Roman Catholic Church, the Roman Church, began to do their own manuscripts. And you have to ask yourself, they did a Greek, Eusebius Greek Bible was about 320 AD, right? And then Jerome's Latin Vulgate was in 380 AD. These were not the first Bibles. But you have to ask yourself, why would they be doing a Greek compilation only like 20, 30 years after Lucian had done his Greek one, and it was received by all the churches in the world as an inspired word? Why would they do that? Because the Greco-Roman Church, the Greek Roman Church, needed a Greek God, a Greek Jesus, a Greek Bible, and Greek doctrine. So they had to have a Bible that supported their doctrine. So they just did all those things. They tweaked it. If you doubt me, look in your Bible and see if you can find the name of God in Hebrew in there anywhere. Used to be you could. Now, it was wiped from the New Testament in a very early period, except in the Hebrew Gospels. But now they've even wiped it from the Old Testament as well. So, that should be proof to anyone with an open mind that that was their goal, to get the Hebrew name of God and name of Yeshua out of the text. A lot of people are really surprised when you tell them that what we call Christianity, the manuscript, at the time that the New Testament was written, what we now call Christianity was every bit of it was a sect of the Judaic Church. All of it. Everybody. Okay? It took a long time for the Greek believers to outnumber the Hebrew believers. It wasn't until the 2nd century, even late in the 2nd century. Eventually that dramatically outnumbered them by the 4th century. Okay, this is a quote from Ben Wilkinson, our Authorized Bible. Protected by the scholarship of the pure church are in different phases, such as the church of Pella in Jordan. Remember, they were called to flee when the army of the Romans, Titus, surrounded them. Where the Christians fled when in AD the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, by the Syriac church of Antioch, where Lucian of Antioch was, by the Italic church in northern Italy, and also at the same time by the Gallic church, the Cathars in southern France. They were neo-Messianics. They were Gnostics, but they were neo-Messianics. By the Celtic church in Great Britain, by the Waldensian and the churches of the Reformation. We will get to that. Here's the Italic Bible. This was prized throughout Europe. It took 750 years for the Latin Vulgate to supplant it, because it was more ancient than all the rest. It was the accepted text. It took a long time, and mainly that was done through military force. The Neo-Messianic Church formed the Italic seed, named after the Italic Bible, in North Italy. Oops. The old Waldensians did not secede from the Church of Rome. They were never a part of it. When the Romans started to exert pressure on everybody to come under their umbrella, they said no, and they left. These assemblies of Jewish Christians being persecuted at Rome because they persisted in obedience to the Torah, to the law of Moses, wandered off into the valleys where their descendants remain to this day, and they do. They survived. All the oppression the Roman Church threw at them over the centuries just kept pushing them further in the valleys. That's what Waldenses means, people of the valleys. The Vaudois in French, Waldenses, Waldensians in English. So it kept pushing them further and further until they were in Switzerland. And we'll see what happened there. So the Waldensian Bible predates the Latin Vulgate and Eusebius' Greek Bible. And we know from the preface to the Hebrew Gospels that it had already been published in Lombardy, the heart of the Neo-Messianics in the Waldensian country. Okay. Lombardy was the seat of Reformation. So Jerome wrote about it, wrote about their priests like Vigilantius. And he was one of the people that influenced the Waldensians. A wonderful, incredible story about him, actually. In southern France, the Cathars Neo-Messianic Church brings chivalry to the West. This was a Messianic ideal. For that, and if you don't know, it's called courtly love, but if you've never heard of it, it's better known as chivalry. It was a movement in which it was your courage in combat needed to be equal to your devotion to your mate or your woman as a queen, even if she was a commoner. You put her up on a much, much higher level, treated her as your queen. And that was as important as courage in combat. But it was also a higher ideal of all types. You know, knights were expected to be gentlemen, to be poets, to be intelligent, to be artistic. Right? It was just a flowering of civilization. It wasn't enough to be brutal, be a good hand with the sword. All these were neo-Messianic ideas that were brought in by the Cathars. An incredible story. Of course, we had to stop that, right? Treating women equally, can't have that. So they brought, that first crusade was to wipe out the neo-Messianic Cathars in southern France. That was the very first crusade. That was the age of chivalry and crusades, the court of love. This was the romantic love came into the Western mindset. Before women were arranged marriages, there was really not much love lost in many of these marriages. The court of love, this was in Poitiers. It was here a knight learned to be true to his beloved, his queen, no matter her rank, to be brave and devout to his mission of the Holy Grail, not to find a treasure, but to drink from the chalice as had the Messiah, and to know the good, the truth, the light. Nothing short of a new Gnostic religion, that of the underground church. This was in Occitania, where there were Cathar Bibles. I have not been able to locate a copy of one. Celtic Church. The Messianic spread to the Celtic Church. Well, they didn't spread to there. St. Patrick was Messianic. How do we know that? The Book of Leinster, the first book written in Irish, says that his people came from the time when Rome surrounded Jerusalem in 70. That's mentioned in Luke, right? And a lot of people left. And they let them leave because they didn't want they didn't want any more people on the walls than necessary when they were fighting. So they were happy to let them leave. So most of the Christian church left, not all of them. And they were taken by the Romans as captives. And they were moved to the way, what they did with them, they took them to the extremity of their empire and dumped them in the no man's land between them and the barbarians, in this case the Celts, right? So they had to basically fight for their own survival and keep the Celts off the back of the Romans, right? So that's where his parents came from. They were moved to London, that area, after the conquest of Jerusalem in 70. So he was a real Jewish Christian Messianic.
You don't hear that on St. Patrick's Day, do you?
No, you don't. You know. No, after he died, they appropriated his ministry. And the same thing they did with Joan of Arc. You know, first they burn her at the stake, then they make her a saint, then they appropriate her ministry. So St. Patrick was not, he never stepped foot in Rome. He was in opposition to the things that Rome believed. They practiced a Christian Passover. Their day started in the evening, like the Hebrew days did. They used the Hebrew calendar, Hebrew feast days. But most of all, they practiced what they used to practice in the Temple of Solomon. It's called Laus Perennis in Latin, which means perpetual prayer. So St. Patrick was an incredible individual, and the Shekinah glory came down on the Celtic people, and they kept it there by 24/7 praise of God with musical instruments and singing for more than 3 centuries. And they experienced daily miracles as a result of it. The countries fell like dominoes to Patrick and the people that he trained, his apostles that he trained. Columbanos, all of them. So the proof is in the pudding, really. So the Celtic Church was a Messianic church. The Romans finally got there a couple of centuries later, and then they organized the nobles on their side, and by military force they gutted the Celtic church. And they expelled the Celtic priests from their churches and their monasteries and their place of education that had kept education alive during the Middle Ages, during the Dark Ages. In Ireland and other parts of the Celtic Church, they had books from all over the world. Beautiful books, beautifully calligraphed. Like the Book of Kells, studded with jewels all over it. But, you know, it was another Roman sovereignty, so they got an army together and they kicked them out.
Wow.
They went back up in the hills. Interesting story, because it doesn't in there, because you remember, it shows people don't just slink away. All right, so they went back up in there. Remember, they practiced perpetual praise with an assortment of instruments. So they had developed their own unique type of music with very unique type of instruments over the centuries. Many of them were pushed out entirely and immigrated to the colonies, where they went up in the mountains. Possibly because they were used to it, but also because, you know, the colonies were all about religious freedom. For me, not for you, right? So Quakers didn't want them, you know, the other churches didn't want them, so they went up into the mountains, and there they took their very unique music, praise gospel music, and their very unique instruments, and that exploded on the scene in our era as bluegrass gospel music, which sparked a whole new genre of music called country music.
Interesting.
But that is Messianic music. I'd love to do a film on that. I think that would be absolutely incredible. Let's go to Ireland. What do you think? Mm-hmm. Again, we have the same markers of the Messianic, Neo-Messianic church. Equality of women, education, and in preaching. Very well established there. Very well educated. The monasteries of the Celtic countries were a shining, shining light during the darkness of the Middle Ages, where there was literacy all over the place. Okay, where's my...
Over there on the right.
There it is.
Nope, right there. There you go.
Come on.
There you go. Should be able to double.
You notice these new laptops are very sensitive.
You might be able to use your arrow keys instead of the...
I'm not really, because this is a PDF, so it's not, doesn't just jump page to page.
Okay.
Okay, number 7, Messianic scribes in Spain created a golden age. So you have the Nestorians out there in the world. They took all that huge library of books with them in Hebrew, in Aramaic, and Greek. They were translated into Arabic. Now the Arabs have taken Spain, and there's a period they call the convivencia, which, you know, they're like people, they fight a lot, but then they shake hands and they sit down and have dinner together. So they have the convivencia going, where there are periods where they're all working together in both the Arab city-states and in the Christian ones too. There were centuries of convivencia. And during this period, all these manuscripts from the East in Arabic get translated back into the European languages. So works about Aristotle and Plato, Galen, and medicine, and astronomers and mathematicians. You know, like Euclid, Ptolemy, and Diophantus, and Apollonius. All of these things start to get translated back into European countries. And this is what pulls them out of the Dark Ages. All this new information coming in from the East. They're re-educating themselves. So scribes were coming from all of Europe down to Toledo, the seat of the Neo-Messianic Church in Sepharad, and they were rubbing shoulders with Neo-Messianic scribes who were bringing these things back into Europe. So the Nestorians, preservation of these materials and their knowledge about them, they taught them to the Arabs, creating a golden age among the Arabs. The peak of their civilization was because of these Nestorians, who took all this wealth of knowledge and information from the Hebrews and the Greeks, and they taught it to them. That's how they knew it. And it came back into Europe. 5,000-mile journey. So Toledo, the seat of the Messianic Church, became the gateway to the East. All the scholars of Europe flocked there to rediscover all these treasures from the East. The Jewish Christians had created a resurgent Messianic church. We spoke about this, right? 250,000 strong. It was a big deal. They had their own synagogues, yeshiva schools, priests, and bishops. They were of four types. The Sephardim, these are the Jews who converted. They were of four types. Some followed the Hebraic tradition. They are the sons of Zion. And others followed the Greek tradition. They became the sons of Greece. Some sincerely believed in Christ, the Messiah. They are the true Messianics. And those that wanted to assimilate, they were called new Christians, as opposed to the old Christians, right? The Spanish. And there were some who were faking it, or couldn't care less, they'll do whatever you ask them to. So they became the crypto-Jews, and those who just wanted to leave the bloody business of religion behind and assimilate into the Western world. And they became secularists or assimilationists. You know, they would have been your agnostics. But those are the four outcomes. And historians firmly deny that there were any sincere Messianics in this group. But history defies that. There's plenty of proof that there were, but you just don't hear that in the narrative. But the narrative is controlled by the people who wanted to wipe out. It's controlled by the church, by the people who wanted them wiped out. Number 9, 1492, Columbus was a Messianic. This is how long it took for the Spanish to finally conquer all of the Muslims that had taken over Spain. Till 1492. They finally retook Granada. That was the last. And then they immediately turned and told the Jews they had to leave. Convert or leave. Okay. All right, so they had to go. And Columbus' ship left on the last day of the deadline of the Jews having to leave. He left in ships full of Jews trying to escape, the Jews leaving that were being expelled, and Messianics that were fleeing the Inquisition. The Inquisition had been started in 1478. And they had already burned it to take thousands of Messianics, and tens of thousands of Messianics had already fled. They were depopulating the cities, and especially of their professionals, who are Jews or Messianics. They're doctors, they're lawyers, they're diplomats, they're scribes, they're translators. They were depopulating Spain of all their professionals. However, what did they care? They discovered a new land, a new world where there was plenty of silver and gold, so they were happy. However, 15% of all the colonies and 15% of all the first colonists, including the very first colony established by Columbus, were Messianics. Now, as these colonies grew bigger and bigger, remember these Messianics, they did manage to get a lot of their money out. When the Jews were expelled, managed to get a lot of their money out because they didn't want them to take any of their money or property, but they managed to do it. They did it by creating an international banking system and a credit worthiness program. So when they're in the New World, these people, these Messianics, they could get money if they saw opportunity. They had credit. And they could put their gold into a bank and draw on it in Europe, or vice versa. So it was a major innovation. It was a Messianic one. It was the Messianic diaspora all over the world. There are Messianics and Jews in every port. They fled anywhere they could find safe haven: Turkey, North Africa, Holland, Italy, and the New World. And every place to where they fled, almost, reports having a golden age of prosperity and productivity in the arts and sciences. Because here, the printers were coming, they brought their type with them and set up Hebrew presses in North Africa and everywhere. They set up banks. They were the ship owners. They may have only been 15% of the population in the colonies, but they controlled 75% of the commerce. So Messianics played an oversized role in the New World. I want to go back to that last slide. Columbus, once they discovered that he was acting as a agent of Portugal. Yes, he was not from Italy, he is from Portugal. Never set foot in Italy, didn't speak Italian. He spoke Portuguese and Hebrew. He spoke Hebrew. One reason we know he was a Messianic. He had his family records destroyed so the Inquisition couldn't get to him. His money for the voyage, he was financed by Messianics. One of them was Louis Santangel, who was the treasurer of Ferdinand and Isabel, king and queen of Spain. It was a myth that she pawned her royal jewels for the journey. Sounded good though, on CNN that story played really well, but it wasn't true. He was financed by Luis Santangel and Gabriel Sanchez. So Sanchez's son went on the voyage with him. Later on in his third voyage, he had 50 sons of Messianics, 50 Messianic teenagers on board. They wanted to get them out of the reach of the Inquisition. They're old Spaniards. His boats became unseaworthy. He was stranded in Jamaica. His old Spanish sea dogs mutinied against him. See, these are stories you don't hear because there was an active effort to erase the Messianic history of the New World. So he's, and of the early church as well. Let's just skip to the part about Paul, preaching to the Gentiles. That's not a coincidence. So he's there and he's got these old Christian sailors that are mutinying. And his brother, Columbus' brother Bartholomew, and his son were on the voyage, and they convinced him to let them arm the teenagers, the teenage converso army that he had. So he armed them. They went up against these old sailors, and these guys had real combat experience. I mean, they were salty sea dogs. And they laughed at the teenagers when they saw them approaching. But when they tried to rush them, the teenage converso army brought down the first half dozen of them, and after that they took them captive pretty easy and put their captain in chains. So this is kind of an interesting anecdote, isn't it? The first organized military action in the world. Columbus was saved by an army of teenage Messianics. So a very interesting story.
It's not a narrative you hear about.
No, you don't hear that narrative. He had left a colony of 39 people there when he went back. A lot of the Messianics did not want to go back to the Inquisitions in Spain. So they became divided into two factions, the old Spaniards and the Messianics. The old Spaniards, they were not trading for gold anymore. Columbus always did. He always did that. He's very honorable in this thing. But the old Spaniards, if they wanted somebody's gold, they just took it. If they wanted their wife, they just took her and killed the owner of the gold or the husband of the wife. But think about it. That's exactly the template that was going on back in Spain, right? If you were a heretic or an infidel, that meaning a Messianic or an Arab, for example, a Muslim, none of the 10 Commandments applied to you. You could lie to them, which they did. You could imprison them. You could take their women, you take their property, kill them, torture them. Doesn't count. None of that counted. So this was the template. We call it the template of the Inquisition. This was the template the conquistadors took with them to the New World. So they were conquering. They were spreading salvation by the sword. Now other people have done this too. The Mohammedans did it, all right, but we're talking about the New World here. And also they had found out that Columbus was an agent of Portugal. The letter still exists from the King of Portugal, who calls him his agent. It's a letter of entree into the court. So that's how he immediately sided up with the Messianic financiers, because he was a Messianic. And they knew this, right? So here he is. Now they found out about him. They actually throw him in prison after he comes back after his third voyage, or his second voyage, but he gets out because he was too big a deal at that point for them to just sort of erase. But they cut his funding, so he had lousy ships for his third voyage, and they just couldn't make the trip back. But that's the reason they were held up in Jamaica for a year before they were rescued. So he writes this letter to Queen Isabella. Should I die in Jamaica and my proprietary rights withdrawn, ingratitude will bring down the wrath of heaven, so that the wealth that I have discovered shall be the means of stirring up all mankind to revenge, and the Spanish nation shall suffer hereafter. What do you think about those words? That's pretty brave talk there, huh? Since there was no postal system to send this letter back to Queen Isabel, it's probably best that she never saw it. He's in Jamaica. Later on to Jamaica, most of the colonies are about 10-15% Messianic. Jamaica was 50%. They invited the English to come in and take over Jamaica from Spain, which they did without firing a shot. The half the army was Messianic, all right? And their officers appeared to surrender. They'd already written up the Treaty of Peace, and you just sign here, we'll sign here, all right? So it became English, because the Messianics didn't want to be under the authority of Spain and the Inquisition. For some reason, they hated the Spanish. I wonder why.
Well, they were killing them.
Yeah, of course. They were horrible. The Inquisition was terrible. And it followed them to the New World. It did follow them to the New World. And wiped out their communities. Because once they had established these industries, they sent the Inquisition in to kill them and take the money away from them, basically. But anyway, back to this letter. So Jamaica becomes English. The English invite all the pirates of the Mediterranean to make Jamaica their home, which they did. Gave them letters of marque. And didn't cost the English a penny. You know, they would go out and take Spanish vessels and they'd share some of it with the English. They'd defend their own shores. The Messianic merchants, the ship owners, they're big-time ship owners, provided them with the ships and the funding to go out, and the intelligence, which, remember, there are Messianics in every port in the world, in the entire world. So they knew exactly what cargo they were taking, where, and when they were leaving, and what the captain had hidden in his cabin. They knew everything, you know, so they had an incredible intelligence network, okay? Once the Inquisition started going to the New World, the Messianics realized we can't move on. There's no place to go where the Inquisition can't reach us. And they came to this stunning conclusion that proves that they were not victim. They did not have a victim mentality, despite all the prosecution they've been through. They decided they had to bring down the Spanish Empire, the most powerful empire in the world at the time. So they concocted this scheme, invited the English in Jamaica, made Jamaica the pirate capital of the world. The Messianics had a surrogate navy, and I'm not saying they did good things. These were pirates. They robbed and they raped and they pillaged and they burned. Part of me says the Spanish got back exactly what they had dished out. right? But I'm not trying to condone the pirate activity. But they did create a surrogate navy that within 15 years broke the back of the Spanish Empire. They took so much gold from them. All right, they invaded all of the coastal villages or settlements on the Main, took their gold. They marched across the Isthmus of Panama. Captain Morgan became the leader of the pirates because it was an English-based thing, and they were at war with Spain. They wanted in on the riches of the New World, so they were challenging them. Captain Morgan and his pirates made it across the Isthmus of Panama. I've been there. I've crossed it in a Jeep on roads, and it's hard enough. But they cut their way through the jungles, crossed the raging rivers, climbed the mountains, and got to Panama, the world's mart for gold and silver. And they took it from the landside and the seaside both. But the haul from that was just impossible to actually count. There was so much. All right, there we go. So they actually broke the back of the Spanish Empire. Now remember, they'd already drained themselves of their professionals. They kicked out their Jewish doctors, they kicked out their Messianic scribes and professionals and mercantile people, right? Now they have lost the treasures of the New World, which was sustaining them. That's all being taken away from them now, right? They reverted to a third world country, like within a couple of generations. You may not remember because you're all very young puppies. I went to Spain before it became a modern. It was kind of like Mexico used to be back then. It was definitely a third world country. But they did that once they had lost their professional class, and once they'd lost their treasures of the New World. There was nothing left. The population was reduced from 40 million in the Middle Ages to about 10 by the 1800s. Messianic diaspora. They created a worldwide network of trade and banking in every port. They were in every port. They had money. They could loan out money for enterprises like pirates. And there were a lot of other things. They started the sugar plantations and sugar factories. Brazil wood, all kinds of new crops were coming out of the New World, new animals, new plants, new books from the East, porcelain from China, and silks, spices from India. I mean, these things were all incredibly important. It's just the ensemble of them. It was just spices. When they had enough spices to preserve food in Europe in time to get their meat and vegetables to market because they were salted, population of Europe tripled. I mean, these things were amazing. It was an incredible boon to science and industry. They had all these scientific journals of the Greeks coming back into the old world, and new things. New music from the Arabs, new art from the Chinese, new scientific information from everywhere in the known world. That's what caused the Renaissance. So the Inquisition did everything in its power to destroy the Messianic Church for 356 years. It didn't stop until the 19th century, but the Messianics took it out in the New World. Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. They turned to faith and Scripture as their major weapons against evil. Remember Jehovah your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth. And did so in order to confirm his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. They had a covenant with Jehovah and with Yeshua. In Jeremiah 31:31, it talks about the renewed covenant, or the new covenant. And there are two requirements for it. Number one, the new covenant is with the tribes of Judah and Israel. So why do we, as Gentiles, think we have any place in that? Well, because because by our acceptance of the Son of God, we are grafted in to the tree of Abraham with all the blessings equal to anybody else. You know, slave and freedman, Greek and Hebrew, right? Man or woman, they're all equal under Yehovah. You know, that's our place in there because we accept His Son, and also He will write the Torah in our hearts. We have to accept that part too. That He'll write the Torah in our hearts. Of course, the Torah, remember, has been thrown out of the book too. It's always translated out of the Bible as law, which is a rather ambiguous term. If you put the Torah back into all the readings in the New Testament, you'd be amazed. How about this one? Matthew, he says, people who come to me and say, Lord, Lord, have we not cast out demons in your names and done miraculous things in your name? And I will be forced to say to them, I don't know you. Get away from me, you who are without Torah. That's what happens when you put Torah back into the Bible.
Wow.
You know, you're without Torah. You're not part of this covenant. You know, maybe you've been doing those things. Maybe you haven't. Maybe you've been faking it. Maybe you're just lying. I don't know, but I don't know you. I can tell you that. I don't know you. So it's very eye-opening when you put it back. When you put the word Torah back in. Messianics became masters of worldwide trade. Innovative letters of exchange and credit changed the world. Sparked the Renaissance. All this flood of money, tons of money, coming into the old world. And they used, and into the hands of many people who are Messianics, or Jews, others too, but it became common for them to sponsor their favorite artists, our poet, our painter, our scientist, our philosopher, our mathematician. And there was a flowering of incredible accomplishment in absolutely every area of endeavor, Because now these people could afford to do the thing that they specialized in all the time, instead of having to work another job and do their mathematics, their engineering, you know, their poetry, their philosophy, their art on the side. So you had this incredible blossoming because of the money, basically, and the sponsoring of these brilliant people.
The original angel investors?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The angel investors, that's a good way to put it. The European Renaissance sparked another thing. It was sparked by the Messianic Golden Age. It all this money came through Toledo and Lisbon. The Portuguese were involved, but Lisbon and Toledo, the neo-Messianic capital of the world, and the Golden Age in Spain spread to the rest of Europe. Okay, and then of course the Spanish killed it off by kicking all of their Messianics and Jews out. They kicked the Jews out. The Messianics fled because of the Inquisition. Can you see that? Does that make sense to you? Mm-hmm. That would happen. That's the way it happened. And they sparked another thing called the Renaissance. Because all of this led to them. The printing press ended the church's monopoly on the word. They didn't want it produced in anything other than Latin, so it was banned. Greek was banned. Hebrew was banned. Even reading the Bible was banned. Putting the Bible in the vernacular language instead of in the common language of the people instead of in Latin was banned. All right, well, with the printing press, you could no longer keep the lid on this stuff. It began to be printed in every language in the world, and that happened in the 15th century. The Renaissance was in the early 16th century. There were presses everywhere. There were Bibles in every language, and by the time these Reformation Bibles got out there in the vernacular languages of the people, within 30 years, 2/3 of Europe became Protestant. Where did these Reformation Bibles come from? They came from the Waldensians in Geneva, who still had their manuscripts that they had been carefully preserving and copying, keeping away from the Roman Catholic, from the Roman stream of Bibles. Two streams. One comes down from the original Hebrew Gospels and the original Tanakh, and also the Greek manuscripts and the Latin manuscripts. The Itala was put into Itala. And then the ones done by the Greco-Roman Church. So they go to Geneva. Who goes to Geneva? John Calvin. Zwingli goes. Martin Luther. All of the reformers go there. And they use those versions of the Bible to create Bibles in German and Italian, the Diodati Bible. In French, the Olivetan Bible. Olivetan was a Waldensian pastor. And the Tefel Bible, the German Bible by Luther. All these came from the Messianics in the Italic Sea in northern Italy. They got many of these people pushed back up into Switzerland. Behind the Reformation is behind almost every spiritual movement of note. One finds the personality of a Jewish Christian. In this case, we're talking about Nicholas of Lyra, who so influenced Martin Luther's philosophy and his theological innovation that they say, if Lyra had not written, Luther would not have come forth. Very interesting. So Luther based a lot of his writings on the works of Nicholas of Lyra, who was a neo-Messianic. So in Lombardy, the Waldensians, the neo-Messianic church, came back, as they say, gathered its forces in secret in order to emerge once more into daylight when opportunity presented itself during the European Reformation, in which this leaven of the early church, the early apostolic church, is found, engendering this great religious movement, which was imbibed from Paulician missionaries. So here's the Reformation Bibles, the two streams. Go up here. You can see the ones on the left come from the Tanakh and the Hebrew Gospels. You can see they're all earlier than the ones on the right. The Vatican really responded because they had to. Once 2/3 of Europe became Protestants because they had given them the English Bible and the Italian Bible and the German Bible to read, then they started producing English and Italian and German Bibles to read. The church started producing them, basically because they had no choice. But every single one of the Roman Bibles were after the Messianic Bibles, the Reformation Bibles. The Messianics were the first discoverers, explorers, and colonists in the New World. They were the pilots and the navigators because they had invented them. They had studied maps. They had invented the astrolabe. They were the scientists, scientists of navigation. So they would always have either a Jewish or a Messianic pilot or navigator. They were also the financiers of many of these journeys. They financed it. They colonized the New World in numbers inordinate to their percentage of the population. The Messianic privateers brought down the Spanish Empire and the Inquisition. Like I said, once they figured they had to do that, they figured it out and they did it. They created a surrogate navy. The brilliance of it is just mind-boggling. The Spanish Empire was the most powerful empire in the world. They brought it down in 15 years.
Necessity is a mother of invention.
I know, but it's talk about smart people. You know, they had the finances, they had the ships, they got the English involved. It didn't cost the English a penny, and the Messianics brought down their mortal enemy, the Spanish. It's an amazing, amazing story. You could write volumes about each one of these. We're almost done. I wanted to show you they gave them letters of marque, which is enshrined in our Constitution, Section 1, Article 8. Okay. But these Messianic privateers, and Jewish and others, you know, but they also made up the core of the American Navy during the Revolution. The Revolution, they didn't have a Navy. And they were up against now the strongest sea power in the world, the British, right? Without having that Navy of privateers, many of which were Messianics and Jewish, they wouldn't have had a chance, especially in the War of 1812. Because the British came in, burnt Washington, then they went down and they were going to take New Orleans. The mouth of the Mississippi River controls 1/3 of the continent. The interior, the middle part, goes all the way up to Canada. The only way you could really navigate into those areas were up those waters. And trust me, if they had taken that, they would not have given it back. We'd had to fight them again and again and again until we wiped them out. But they didn't take it. They didn't take it because Andrew Jackson went down there with 750 troops against the 10,000 British troops. But he got a few more, from the Cajuns, the frontiersmen, 500 black freedmen, and of course, the Messianic pirates, led by Jean Lafitte, whose grandfather had died in the Inquisition. Carried a Hebrew Bible with him everywhere.
Wow.
Right, given to him by his grandmother, who raised him, right? He provided them with sea cover at sea, and since he had taken plenty of ships in his time, he provided them with artillery, because Andrew Jackson certainly didn't hump a bunch of artillery pieces down from Tennessee to New Orleans. So, due to his ships at sea and his artillery, they were able to beat off a much larger and well-trained force, British force. Fantastic battle. And the British were no slouches either. General Pakenham was the leader of the British forces, very good tactician. He had sent some barges of British soldiers behind their position, and literally during the battle, they took over the American artillery. Okay, so he had them. They had a couple thousand men with their own artillery and another big, huge army in front of them, big, huge army behind them with their own artillery. Okay, except it didn't work because they advanced their soldiers up to test the lines. And the fire of the American frontiersmen was so accurate, and they also had, cannonade from their artillery. It just wiped them, mowed them down. And don't ever doubt the accuracy of an American frontiersman who can't eat if he can't shoot. So they took him down. General Pakenham was killed in the advance, and so was the leader of the Northumberland Brigade, which was getting wiped off the field. And but they just stood there, how they did in those days. They stood there. They weren't allowed to get down. They just stood in their ranks, and when one guy was killed, the one behind him was step into his position. And they're getting raked by cannon fire. The second in command of General Pakenham was also killed. And the third in command, General Keane, was badly wounded on the battlefield. When word came that General Pakenham's tactic had worked, the British had gone up river and landed behind them and taken the artillery pieces of the Americans. Okay, well, General Keane was probably influenced by the fact that he was badly wounded and he was looking over a field of thousands of dead and dying British soldiers. They still had enough men. They could have called in their reserves and won the battle. But he told them to withdraw. And the battle was over and it had been won by the Americans. And Jean Lafitte, the Messianic, was hailed as the pirate who saved America, which he was, actually. But this is just one little story in the saga, because the core, somebody called me and said, I don't believe that. I don't believe that they were the core of, give me an example. So I sent him a whole page of examples of the ship owners who had dedicated their vessels, their men of war, that they were privateers, and there's like a dozen names of the people, names of their ship, and he wrote me back, okay, well, I guess so. So these things are all well documented. It's not the kind of thing they tell you because it's not the narrative they want you to know. But that formed the core of our Navy, both in the Revolution and in the War of 1812. Absolutely essential.
Something we don't learn in history class.
No.
Not at all.
Oh. Because none of them were trans, probably. So they didn't have anything to write about. During the American Revolution, Messianic privateers helped sink more. They didn't, not all of them. I'm not claiming they did all of this, but 600 British ships and capture an estimated 18 million of cargo. A large proportion of these were Messianic and Jewish privateers from the old days. See, I told you all that stuff already. Okay, number 17, that we only covered 16, right? The Messianics also financed the wars of revolution in South America. Simon Bolivar marched through, and the critical part of his campaign was in the beginning. That's when the Messianics of Curacao financed him and provided him with soldiers who marched with him throughout South America, conquering all those countries. And all those countries, as they gained independence, including the United States, wrote up constitutions that granted religious liberty. Remember the Messianics and the Jews had been hounded out of every country, practically in Europe. And now they've been gained. They have pitched there and put their fortunes, their sacred honor, and their lives on the line with the rest of the revolutionaries rebelling against the powers that be in Europe. And they gained their religious liberty. The Americas became the land of religious liberty, where you can go and you can worship your conscience as you see fit, whether you are Protestant, Catholic, Jewish, Messianic, whatever. That was a Messianic ideal. And they provided the finances and the foot soldiers and the idea. They put it forth. Yeah, we'll support you as long as there's religious liberty. And the fires of the Inquisition in each of those countries went out one by one, never to be seen again. Spain held on. But in the New World, it was over by the 1700s. Not until like 1834, I think, for the Spanish. Another century they hung on to the Inquisition. So now you know at least the tip of the iceberg of the story of the Messianic influence in the world from the first century until the present day.
Wow.
Questions, comments?
Amazing.
All right, thank you.
Amazing
Thank
stuff,
you very much.
really.
Can we have a round of applause, or at least an amen here?
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.